Hi, I'm Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
The November fog of 1891 pressed against the windows of our Baker Street lodgings with the persistence of an unwelcome creditor, transforming the familiar gaslight into wavering phantoms that danced across the sitting-room walls. I had spent the better part of the evening absorbed in the latest issue of The Lancet, while my companion Sherlock Holmes remained characteristically motionless in his armchair, his sharp profile silhouetted against the amber glow of the fire. The familiar aroma of his pipe tobacco mingled with the dampness that seemed to seep through every crevice of our comfortable chambers. It was approaching 9:30 when the urgent rap of knuckles upon our door shattered the evening's tranquillity. Mrs. Hudson's measured tread upon the stairs was followed by voices, one her own, familiar and steady, the other belonging to a woman whose cultured tones carried an unmistakable note of distress. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," announced our landlady, as she appeared in the doorway. "Lady Margaret Ashworth has called upon you. She apologizes for the lateness of the hour, but insists the matter cannot wait until morning." The lady who entered behind Mrs. Hudson was perhaps 40 years of age, possessed of that quiet dignity which speaks of both breeding and strength of character. Her travelling dress, though of excellent quality, bore the telltale signs of hasty departure, and her gloved hands trembled slightly as she removed her hat. Despite the evident strain upon her features, she carried herself with the composure of one accustomed to facing life's adversities with grace. Holmes rose from his chair with that fluid motion which always preceded his engagement with a new puzzle. "Lady Ashworth, please be seated. Watson, perhaps you would be so kind as to pour our guests some brandy. The fog has clearly taken its toll." As I attended to this small courtesy, Lady Ashworth settled herself in the chair Holmes indicated, gathering her composure with visible effort. "Gentlemen, I come to you because Scotland Yard has declared my husband's death a tragic accident, yet every fibre of my being rebels against such a conclusion." "Your husband is recently deceased?" Holmes inquired, his grey eyes already displaying that keen interest which invariably accompanied the introduction of a perplexing case. "3 days ago, Mr. Holmes, Sir Edmund Ashworth was found dead in his private study, a room he had specially constructed for his acoustical experiments. My husband was a man of science, you understand, devoted to the study of sound and its properties. He had created what he called his resonance chamber, a circular room lined with specially curved walls that could capture and amplify the faintest whisper. I found myself leaning forward, intrigued despite the tragic nature of the circumstances and the official cause of death. Dr. Pemberton, who examined the body, concluded that Edmund had suffered a fatal seizure while working late into the night. He was discovered seated at his desk, apparently having collapsed, while making notes in his journal. Lady Ashworth's voice caught slightly. "But, Mr. Holmes, there are aspects of this tragedy that defy all reasonable explanation." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin, a gesture I recognized as indicating his complete attention. "Pray continue, Lady Ashworth. Omit no detail, however seemingly insignificant." The study, as I mentioned, was designed to amplify sound, yet when Sir Edmund was discovered by our butler at 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the room was sealed from within, the door was locked, the single window latched, and there was no other means of entry or exit. She paused, drawing a shuddering breath. "But here is what troubles me most profoundly, gentlemen. Our servants reported hearing my husband's voice emanating from the study at nearly midnight on Monday, a full 7 hours after Dr. Pemberton estimates he had died." The brandy glass slipped slightly in my grasp, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November fog. What exactly did they hear? Thomas, our footman, was passing through the corridor when he heard Sir Edmund's voice quite clearly, calling out what sounded like, "The frequency, the dying echo. Can you hear it?" The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, he said, as if the very walls were speaking. Holmes had grown perfectly still, his keen gaze fixed upon our visitor, with an intensity that seemed to pierce through to the very heart of the mystery. This Thomas, is he a reliable witness? Absolutely. He has been in our service for over a decade and is not given to flights of fancy. Moreover, Mrs. Caldwell, our housekeeper, corroborates his account. She too heard the voice, though she was in the kitchen below at the time. And the physical evidence within the study? Lady Ashworth reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded paper. I took the liberty of copying the final entry in my husband's journal, made apparently just before his death. She handed the document to Holmes, who examined it with his characteristic thoroughness before passing it to me. The handwriting was precise and scientific. The resonance achieved at 440 Hz produces extraordinary amplification. The echo persists far longer than theoretical calculations suggest. Must investigate the temporal displacement of sound waves in confined acoustic spaces. The implications are, here the writing ended abruptly, the pen having apparently fallen from the writer's hand. Most intriguing, Holmes murmured. Tell me, Lady Ashworth, had your husband any enemies? Any recent disputes or difficulties? Edmund was a gentle soul, Mr. Holmes, devoted entirely to his research. However, I must mention that he had recently entered into correspondence with a German physicist, Professor Heinrich Zimmermann, regarding certain theoretical disagreements about the nature of sound propagation. The exchange had grown somewhat heated, though I cannot believe it would lead to violence. And who else had access to your husband's study? Only his assistant, Mr. Reginald Hartwell, a young man of excellent character who helped with the more complex experiments. Sir Edmund was most particular about his privacy when working. Holmes rose and moved to the window, peering out into the fog-shrouded street. Lady Ashworth, I should very much like to examine your husband's study tomorrow morning. The acoustic properties you describe present fascinating possibilities, and I suspect the truth lies hidden within the very walls that witnessed Sir Edmund's final moments. Relief flooded across Lady Ashworth's features. Then you will take the case? Indeed, for if a man's voice can speak from beyond the grave, then we are dealing with either the supernatural, which I categorically reject, or with a human intelligence of considerable ingenuity. He turned back to face us, and I recognized the familiar gleam of intellectual challenge in his eyes. Watson, I believe we shall find this case most illuminating. The dead, as they say, tell no lies, but the living who speak for them often do. As Lady Ashworth departed into the fog-shrouded night, promising to meet us at her Surrey estate the following morning, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary circumstances she had described. Holmes had already begun his restless pacing, his mind clearly engaged with the puzzle before us. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" I asked, settling back into my chair. "A voice that speaks after death, Watson, in a room designed to amplify sound, with a man whose final written words suggest he was on the verge of a significant discovery." He paused in his pacing, his eyes gleaming with that particular intensity that always preceded his most brilliant deductions. "I suspect we shall find that the laws of physics, properly understood, will provide us with all the supernatural elements we require." The morning brought with it a clarity that seemed to mirror Holmes's mental state as we departed Baker Street for the Surrey countryside. The fog had lifted during the night, revealing a crisp autumn day that promised excellent conditions for our investigation. During our railway journey, Holmes remained largely silent, though I observed him studying a railway porter at Victoria Station with that peculiar intensity which always preceded one of his remarkable demonstrations. "You observe that fellow loading the luggage car, Watson?" he murmured as our train began to move. Note the tarred hemp fibres on his sleeve and the red brick dust on his boots. The ribbon in his buttonhole bears the colours of a harvest festival, and the particular clay adhering to his soles suggests the Arun Valley. I venture he has a sister in Horsham whom he visits regularly. I had long since ceased to be amazed by such observations, though they never failed to remind me of the extraordinary mind with which I had the privilege to work. Ashworth Manor presented itself as a handsome Georgian estate, its symmetrical facade rising gracefully from manicured grounds that spoke of both wealth and refined taste. Lady Ashworth met us at the entrance, her composure notably improved from the previous evening, though the strain of recent events remained evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. She led us immediately through corridors lined with family portraits toward the rear of the house, where Sir Edmund had constructed his remarkable study. "I have instructed the servants to avoid this wing entirely since the tragedy," she explained as we walked. "Nothing has been disturbed since the constables completed their examination." I noticed that the corridor leading to Sir Edmund's study was unusually wide, its walls covered with an odd, textured material rather than the conventional wallpaper found elsewhere in the house. Holmes observed this detail as well, running his long fingers along the surface with evident interest. "Cork and felt, if I'm not mistaken," he murmured. "Your husband was clearly concerned with preventing sound from escaping his experiments." The study door itself was a marvel of craftsmanship, constructed of double-thickness oak with rubber, sealing around its edges. Holmes examined the lock mechanism with his magnifying glass, noting fine linear scratches about the keyhole and a faint, greasy smear upon the brass with a peculiar sweet odour. The hinges, though stout, had been recently oiled, with excess having gathered in a tiny black bead at the heel. Before entering the chamber, Lady Ashworth summoned the two servants who had heard the mysterious voice. Thomas, a square-shouldered man with honest eyes, stepped forward with Mrs. Caldwell, a spare woman with capable hands. "Tell Mr. Holmes exactly what you heard on Monday night," Lady Ashworth instructed. Thomas cleared his throat nervously. "It were close on midnight, sir, for I'd just heard the long chime from the hall clock. I was carrying coals for the morning fires when I heard Sir Edmund plain as you hear me now. The frequency, the dying echo. Can you hear it?" The words came queer-like, not from the door, but all along the passage, as if the very walls were speaking. Mrs. Caldwell nodded emphatically. "I was in the kitchen below with the scullery maid when we heard it too, Mr. Holmes." The voice seemed to drift down the stairwell, thin and sharp at once. "I told Thomas to leave it be till morning, for Sir Edmund never liked to be disturbed at his work." "How long did this phenomenon persist?" Holmes inquired. "No more than half a minute," Thomas replied. Then all was still, save for the ticking of the clock. "And the door to the study?" "Fast locked, sir, as always. We never saw the key, but Lady Ashworth says it was found in Sir Edmund's waistcoat pocket." Upon entering the circular chamber, I was immediately struck by its extraordinary acoustic properties. The slightest whisper seemed to carry with unusual clarity, while our footsteps produced an almost musical resonance that lingered far longer than one might expect. The curved walls rose to a domed ceiling, every surface covered with polished wood panels and sound-absorbing materials that created a sense of acoustic isolation unlike anything I had previously experienced. Holmes moved immediately to the centre of the room, where Sir Edmund's desk stood positioned with mathematical precision. The late scientist's papers remained scattered across its surface exactly as they had been found, the final journal entry lying open beside an overturned inkwell. I found myself drawn to this tragic tableau, but something about the scene troubled me. "Holmes," I called softly, "examine this inkwell if you would." My friend approached and studied the overturned vessel with characteristic thoroughness. "Most interesting, Watson. Observe the direction of the ink stain." I followed his gaze and saw what had unconsciously disturbed me. The ink had flowed away from where Sir Edmund's body had been found, suggesting the inkwell had fallen toward the experimental apparatus rather than toward the chair where he had presumably collapsed. Either Sir Edmund rose from his chair before succumbing to his seizure, Holmes observed, or this scene has been carefully arranged to suggest something other than what actually occurred. Lady Ashworth had grown pale during this exchange. "Surely you cannot mean that someone else was present when Edmund died?" Holmes did not answer directly, but continued his methodical examination. Near the baseboard by the door, he discovered a faint grey ring on the polished wood, as if heated metal had rested there, and several specks of pale wax lodged in the seam between floorboards. These he collected with the delicacy of a lepidopterist capturing rare specimens. A peculiar apparatus occupied one corner of the room, consisting of various tuning forks, resonance chambers, and what appeared to be a complex arrangement of curved metal reflectors. Among these instruments lay a heavy tuning fork marked A and several small Helmholtz resonators. "Your husband was investigating the behavior of sound waves in confined spaces," Holmes observed with evident appreciation. "These reflectors would allow him to direct and focus acoustic energy with considerable precision." At this moment a young man appeared in the doorway, pale of countenance and scholarly in appearance, with ink-stained fingers and a nervous habit of pushing back his hair. "Mr. Reginald Hartwell, I presume?" Holmes inquired. "Sir Edmund's assistant?" "Yes, sir. Lady Ashworth said you wished to speak with me." His voice carried the tremor of genuine grief. "I cannot believe Sir Edmund is gone. We concluded our preparation shortly after 5 o'clock on Monday. He dismissed me, saying he would write to Professor Zimmermann with his results before retiring. Had any new apparatus been delivered to the house recently?" Hartwell hesitated. "A case arrived from London 2 days before Sir Edmund's death, shells for the resonators and a small speaking device of novel design." Sir Edmund considered phonographs vulgar but admired their principle. As we prepared to leave the study, Holmes paused at the threshold and spoke a single word, in a normal conversational tone. The sound seemed to circle the room, growing in volume rather than diminishing, before finally fading into silence nearly 10 seconds later. The effect was so startling that Lady Ashworth gasped audibly. "Extraordinary," Holmes murmured with evident satisfaction. Sir Edmund had indeed created something quite unique. The question now becomes whether someone else understood the implications of his discovery well enough to use it for purposes he never intended. The implications of Holmes's words hung in the air like the dying echo we had just witnessed, and I found myself wondering what dark purpose might be served by a room that could make the dead appear to speak. Our examination of the study had raised more questions than it had answered, and I could see from Holmes's expression that he was far from satisfied with the physical evidence before us. Rather than immediately departing the wing, he requested that we retrace our steps along the corridor, this time paying particular attention to its acoustic properties. Standing at the far end of the passage, Holmes spoke a few words in his normal tone, and we watched in fascination as the sound seemed to follow the textured walls, returning to us in a curious, attenuated form that suggested the corridor itself had been designed as part of Sir Edmund's grand acoustic experiment. "You perceive, Watson," he murmured, kneeling once again at the study door to examine the lock mechanism with his magnifying glass, "how the padding checks ordinary noise, yet the geometry sends certain frequencies along a chosen path. Sir Edmund designed not only a chamber to trap sound, but approaches to shape its course." He pointed to the fine scratches around the keyhole and a faint, greasy smear upon the brass that carried a peculiar, sweet odor. Note this delicate lubricant. I associate such oils with chronometers rather than household locks. In a house containing both a scientist and his instruments, that fact proves nothing, yet it is a thread we shall not disdain. Holmes then requested that Lady Ashworth summon all members of the household staff to the morning room. Within minutes, we were introduced to the complete domestic establishment. Thomas and Mrs. Caldwell we had already met, along with Mary the scullery maid, James the gardener, and Mrs. Pemberton the cook. Holmes began his questioning with characteristic precision, seeking to establish the exact sequence of events on the evening of Sir Edmund's death. Mrs. Pemberton confirmed that she had prepared Sir Edmund's dinner tray at 7 o'clock, which Thomas had delivered to the study. The master seemed distracted when I entered, Thomas added. He was adjusting some sort of mechanical device with multiple horns, like a gramophone, but more complex. There were wires connecting different parts, and it made a soft humming sound when operated. Mary, the scullery maid, then provided the most significant revelation of our inquiry. With evident nervousness, she reported seeing a gentleman approaching the house around 8 o'clock, using the side entrance that led directly to the study wing. He was tall and thin, sir, with dark hair and spectacles, foreign-looking if you take my meaning, and he walked with a slight limp. I only glimpsed him through the kitchen window as I was washing the dinner dishes. This testimony caused considerable stir, as Lady Ashworth had no knowledge of any expected visitor that evening. James, the gardener, corroborated this account by reporting peculiar marks in the flower bed beneath the study window, impressions that suggested someone had placed a ladder there, though he had assumed they were from the subsequent police investigation. Holmes's examination of Sir Edmund's recent correspondence proved equally illuminating. Among the papers, we discovered several exchanges with scientific instrument makers in London, including detailed invoices for specialized acoustic apparatus. More significantly, we found a telegram dated the day before Sir Edmund's death, sent from Dover and signed simply Zid. The message was brief but ominous. Arriving Monday evening to discuss your recent claims. Prepare demonstration, professional reputation at stake. Professor Zimmermann, Holmes observed grimly. It appears our German physicist was more concerned about Sir Edmund's work than his published dismissals might suggest. Returning to the study, Holmes conducted a more systematic examination of the experimental apparatus. He discovered a rectangular impression in the dust on a small table near the acoustic reflectors, surrounded by several small holes that suggested the recent presence of adjustable legs or supports. Near the baseboard, he found a faint grey ring on the polished wood, as if heated metal had rested there, and several specks of pale wax lodged in the seam between floorboards. A spirit lamp placed here would warm wax to a plastic state in minutes without smoke, Holmes explained, measuring the distance between the desk and the marked spot. And if a clockwork driver were positioned beneath one of these reflectors, its utterance would not merely be heard, it would be sculpted and sustained by the chamber's unique properties. Young Hartwell, who had remained pale and silent during much of our investigation, provided additional details about the missing device. It was a prototype, sir, a highly directional sound emitter designed to project specific frequencies over considerable distances. Sir Edmund believed it held the key to understanding sound, propagation through unusual media. As Holmes prepared for what he termed tonight's demonstration, he turned to me with that sardonic glint I knew so well. Watson, I believe we shall find that the laws of physics, properly manipulated, can indeed make the dead appear to speak. The question now becomes whether we are dealing with scientific curiosity or something far more sinister. The implications of his words hung in the air like the dying echoes we had witnessed, and I found myself wondering what dark revelation awaited us in the hours ahead. The afternoon brought with it a methodical reconstruction that would prove crucial to our understanding of Sir Edmund's final hours. Holmes announced his intention to demonstrate the mechanical principles behind what the servants had interpreted as supernatural communication, requesting from Mrs. Caldwell a small spirit lamp, sealing wax, a length of fine twine, and a brass bell from the servants' quarters. In the circular study, Holmes positioned himself where the faint grey ring marked the polished floor and began his demonstration with the precision of a natural philosopher. Observe, Watson, how elementary physics may serve the purposes of elaborate deception. He warmed a pellet of wax above the spirit lamp until it achieved a malleable consistency, then fashioned it into a crude hinge between a thin metal ruler and the bell's clapper, threading the twine through a carefully constructed loop. Secure while cool, treacherous when heated, when the wax yields to warmth, tension releases, and our bell speaks. Replace this simple bell with an instrument capable of reproducing human speech, and the chamber's unique acoustic properties will do the rest. Setting a candle at a measured distance from the wax, Holmes adjusted the flame to direct its heat with mathematical precision. The timing would depend upon the thickness of the wax barrier and the intensity of the heat source. With proper calculation, one could achieve remarkable accuracy in delayed activation. He extinguished the flame before the demonstration could complete itself, his purpose being proof of principle rather than practical timing. Before departing the study, Holmes conducted a second experiment that proved equally illuminating. Adjusting two of Sir Edmund's curved reflectors and positioning a Helmholtz resonator upon the desk, he motioned me into the corridor while remaining within the chamber. When he spoke in his normal conversational tone, the words reached me not as a voice from a specific location, but as a thin, ethereal emanation that seemed to flow along the textured walls and pour down the stairwell like an invisible current. In the kitchen below, Mrs. Caldwell started visibly and crossed herself with evident alarm. "The geometry performs our theoretical culprit's work," Holmes observed when we reconvened. "A whisper properly positioned might reach distant ears with supernatural effect. Combined with a timed, mechanical utterance, we have the foundation for our midnight voice." Our next investigation took us to the exterior of the manor, where Holmes conducted a systematic examination of the grounds surrounding Sir Edmund's study. The observations of James, the gardener, proved remarkably accurate. Distinct impressions in the soft earth beneath the study window indicated where the feet of a ladder had recently rested, while scuff marks on the brickwork just below the sill suggested someone had indeed climbed to gain access. More significantly, Holmes discovered minute scratches around the window latch and a barely perceptible chip in the paintwork of the frame. "The window was forced from the outside, Watson, though with considerable skill," he explained, running his magnifying glass over the damaged area. A thin blade, inserted with precision, to release the latch without obvious violence. Our intruder possessed both technical knowledge and practical expertise in such delicate work. Circling the entire house with characteristic thoroughness, Holmes paused to examine various details that had escaped previous notice. Near the kitchen garden path, he discovered a discarded cigar butt of foreign manufacture. Turkish tobacco, Watson, blended in a manner more common to continental preferences than English tastes. He preserved this evidence with the same care he had shown the wax fragments from the study floor. Returning to Sir Edmund's correspondence, Holmes made several discoveries that cast our investigation in a more complex light. Among the papers, we found detailed invoices from Hartwell and Associates, scientific instrument makers of Regent Street, for what was described as a precision acoustic chronometer with variable delay mechanism. The device had been delivered to Ashworth Manor on the Saturday preceding Sir Edmund's death, accompanied by specific operational instructions for acoustically sensitive environments. A chronometer that responds to sound rather than mere temporal progression, Holmes observed with evident satisfaction. Combined with Sir Edmund's resonance chamber and directional reflectors, such an instrument could create remarkably convincing auditory illusions. The question becomes whether Sir Edmund intended this application or whether someone else recognized its potential for elaborate deception. Young Hartwell, who had remained largely silent during our investigations, provided additional details that proved most illuminating. The device arrived with a German gentleman who claimed to represent the manufacturer, he revealed with obvious reluctance. He spent considerable time adjusting its mechanisms and explaining its operation to Sir Edmund. I found his manner rather presumptuous, but Sir Edmund seemed fascinated by the technical possibilities. This revelation aligned perfectly with Mary's testimony regarding the foreign visitor, and Holmes's expression grew increasingly thoughtful as the implications became clear. A German gentleman with technical expertise arriving to demonstrate equipment that could produce precisely the effects we have witnessed. The coincidence strains credibility beyond acceptable limits. As evening approached, Holmes requested that we journey to the village inn where, according to the telegram from Dover, Professor Zimmermann had likely taken lodgings. The King's Harp proved to be a modest establishment whose landlord readily confirmed that a foreign gentleman matching Zimmermann's description had indeed stayed there on Monday night. The man had arrived on the late train, inquired about directions to Ashworth Manor, departed on foot around 8 o'clock, and returned after 10:30 to take refreshment before retiring. He seemed agitated when he returned, the landlord added, took his ale in silence and went straight to his room, settled his account early Tuesday morning, and departed on the first coach to the station. The timeline corresponded exactly with our reconstruction of events, yet Holmes appeared far from satisfied with this apparently straightforward resolution. As we returned to Ashworth Manor through the gathering dusk, I observed that familiar expression of intellectual dissatisfaction that invariably preceded his most brilliant insights. "The evidence against Professor Zimmermann appears overwhelming, Watson," he mused. "Yet something in the very completeness of that evidence troubles me. The obvious solution in cases of this complexity often proves to be an elaborate misdirection, designed to satisfy cursory investigation while concealing deeper truths." "You suspect we are being deliberately led toward Zimmermann as our culprit?" "I suspect, my dear fellow, that we are dealing with a mind of considerable sophistication, one that understands not only the principles of acoustic deception, but also the psychology of criminal investigation. Tonight's observations will determine whether our German physicist is the architect of this elaborate scheme or merely another instrument in a more complex composition." The implications of Holmes's words hung in the evening air like the resonant echoes we had witnessed in Sir Edmund's chamber, and I found myself wondering what revelations awaited us as darkness fell over Ashworth Manor and the true nature of the dying echo prepared to reveal itself. The evening meal at Ashworth Manor proceeded with the subdued formality appropriate to a house touched by recent tragedy. Yet I observed that Holmes's attention remained sharply focused upon our fellow diners. Lady Ashworth bore herself with admirable composure, though her eyes frequently sought the reassuring presence of young Hartwell, who sat with the quiet dignity of one genuinely grieved by his mentor's death. Holmes, for his part, consumed little but observed much, his keen gaze moving between our hosts with that calculating intensity I had learned to associate with his most complex deductive processes. "Mr. Hartwell," Holmes remarked with apparent casualness as the soup course was cleared, "your surname is not common in the scientific instrument trade, yet I notice Sir Edmund's invoices include several items from Hartwell and Associates of Regent Street. Might there be a family connection? The young man coloured slightly, but maintained his composure. My uncle established the firm before I was born, Mr. Holmes. I occasionally recommend his craftsmanship to colleagues. Though I hold no financial interest in the business, Sir Edmund always insisted upon paying full market rates for any apparatus. There was nothing irregular in our arrangements. Nothing irregular whatsoever, Holmes agreed smoothly, though I detected that subtle tightening of expression which indicated he had filed away a fact of considerable significance. And this uncle of yours, does he specialize in any particular type of scientific equipment? Precision instruments primarily, chronometers, acoustic apparatus, devices requiring delicate calibration. His workshop produces some of the finest mechanical timers in London. Hartwell's pride in his family's craftsmanship was evident, yet I noticed a slight tremor in his voice that suggested deeper currents beneath his composed exterior. Lady Ashworth contributed additional details that proved most illuminating regarding her husband's final day. Edmund's behaviour on Monday was most unusual, gentlemen. He typically maintained rigid habits: dinner at 7, work until 10:30, then tea with me before retiring. That evening, however, he sent word through Thomas that he would be working late and was not to be disturbed under any circumstances. Had Sir Edmund ever before requested such complete isolation? Holmes inquired. Never. Even during his most intensive research periods, he would emerge for our customary tea. It was one of the few social conventions he maintained, despite his absorption in scientific pursuits. She dabbed at her eyes with evident distress. I confess I was somewhat hurt by his dismissal, though I attributed it to excitement over his recent correspondence. This revelation prompted Holmes to examine more carefully the sequence of letters between Sir Edmund and Professor Zimmermann. What emerged painted a portrait of intellectual rivalry that had grown increasingly acrimonious over the preceding months. Zimmermann's initial challenges to Sir Edmund's acoustic theories had escalated into personal attacks upon his competence, culminating in a scathing review published in the German Journal of Applied Physics that questioned not merely theoretical conclusions, but professional integrity itself. Strong words for academic discourse, Holmes observed, studying the German professor's most recent letter. Zimmermann accused your husband of fundamental mathematical errors and called his work the fantasies of an amateur dabbling in serious science. Such public humiliation might drive a man to desperate measures to vindicate his reputation. Following dinner, Holmes requested permission to conduct what he termed a practical demonstration in Sir Edmund's study. With Lady Ashworth's somewhat reluctant consent, we returned to the circular chamber, where Holmes began a systematic examination of the acoustic apparatus with the aid of several candles and his magnifying glass. What he discovered among the complex arrangement of reflectors and resonators was a device that had escaped our earlier notice, a small brass mechanism concealed behind one of the larger Helmholtz chambers. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured, carefully adjusting the instrument's delicate components. This apparatus represents a remarkable fusion of phonographic and chronometric principles. The device proved to be far more sophisticated than the simple timing mechanism described in Sir Edmund's invoices. Its brass cylinder bore minute grooves that could record and reproduce human speech with startling fidelity, while its clockwork mechanism could be set to activate at predetermined intervals or in response to specific acoustic triggers. Someone with intimate knowledge of Sir Edmund's work could have recorded his voice during an earlier visit, Holmes explained, demonstrating how the chamber's unique acoustic properties would amplify and direct the device's output along the corridor. The timing mechanism operates through acoustic resonance, specific frequencies that activate the replay function. A whisper at the proper pitch becomes a ghostly voice echoing through the very walls. The implications were staggering. Yet Holmes appeared far from satisfied with this mechanical explanation. The question remains, Watson, who possessed both the technical expertise and the opportunity to implement such an elaborate deception? He examined the device's brass nameplate with his magnifying glass. Manufactured by Zimmermann and Associates, Scientific Instruments, Heidelberg, our German professor appears to have provided the very tool used in his own misdirection. As the evening progressed toward midnight, Holmes announced his intention to maintain surveillance upon the study wing. If our theory proves correct, Watson, someone must periodically service this mechanism to ensure its continued operation. Such devices require regular attention, winding, adjustment, perhaps replacement of the recording cylinder. He positioned himself at a window overlooking the manor's side entrance, while I took station in the corridor where we could observe any approach to the study door. The vigil proved both lengthy and revealing. Near 11:30, a faint light flickered briefly in an upstairs window before the house returned to darkness. Holmes made a notation in his leather-bound book, but offered no comment. Then, as the manor clock chimed midnight, a slender figure emerged from the servants' entrance and moved with considerable stealth toward the study wing. It was Reginald Hartwell, carrying no lantern but navigating the familiar grounds with practiced ease. He paused at the study door, his head cocked as if listening intently, before producing a small metallic object from his pocket. His movements at the lock were precise and practiced, suggesting not forced entry, but rather the skilled manipulation of familiar mechanisms. Within moments, he had gained access to the chamber, pulling the door shut behind him with barely a whisper of sound. "Remarkable," Holmes breathed, lowering his field glass. "The young man possesses either a key or an intimate knowledge of how to bypass the very lock Sir Edmund had so carefully secured." We watched in fascination as Hartwell remained within the study for perhaps 15 minutes before re-emerging with even greater haste than he had shown upon entry. He appeared to be servicing the mechanism rather than searching for evidence, I observed, as Hartwell retreated toward the servants' quarters. His purpose seemed specific and well-rehearsed. Holmes's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the implications of what we had witnessed. Recall, Watson, the faint greasy smear upon the lock's brass, and that peculiar sweet odor we detected. Chronometer oil, I suggested, and who among this household would possess such specialized lubricants and the skill to apply them with surgical precision? The implications settled upon me with chilling clarity. Hartwell, the devoted assistant, the quiet scholar with family connections to precision instrument makers, had demonstrated not merely access to the crime scene, but familiarity with the very mechanisms that might have been employed in creating the acoustic deception. The obvious trail leading to Professor Zimmermann now appeared to be an elaborate misdirection, concealing a far more personal and intricate web of betrayal. "The dying echo speaks when its master commands," Holmes murmured, as we prepared to return to our chambers. "But tomorrow, Watson, we shall determine whether young Hartwell is that master, or merely another instrument in a more complex composition. The night has revealed its first secret. Now we must discover what deeper truths lie hidden beneath this carefully orchestrated symphony of deception." As I reflected upon the evening's revelations, I found myself wondering how many other assumptions about this case would prove to be as carefully constructed as the acoustic illusions that had first brought us to Ashworth Manor. In the corridors where sound itself had been transformed into an instrument of murder, the truth awaited our discovery like a resonant frequency waiting to be struck. The morning brought with it a clarity that seemed to sharpen Holmes's analytical faculties to their keenest edge. I found him in the breakfast room before dawn, surrounded by his notes from the previous evening's observations, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic pose of intense concentration. The evidence of Hartwell's midnight activities lay spread before him like pieces of an intricate puzzle, each fragment demanding careful consideration before the larger pattern could emerge. "Watson," he announced as I joined him at table, "our nocturnal surveillance has provided us with facts, but facts that point in directions both obvious and contradictory. Young Hartwell's behavior suggests intimate knowledge of the acoustic apparatus, yet something in his manner last night spoke more of desperation than calculation." He gestured toward his notes with evident satisfaction. "This morning we shall test the strength of his explanations against the weight of physical evidence." Following breakfast, Holmes requested that Hartwell join us in the study for what he termed a practical demonstration of the acoustic principles involved. The young man appeared composed but pale, his scholarly demeanour intact, despite the obvious strain of recent events. Lady Ashworth accompanied us, her presence lending an air of formal inquiry to the proceedings. "Mr. Hartwell," Holmes began with characteristic directness, "last evening you were observed entering this study well after midnight. Perhaps you would explain the nature of this visit?" His tone remained conversational, yet I detected the underlying steel that marked his most serious interrogations. Hartwell coloured slightly but maintained his composure. "I confess I did return to the study, Mr. Holmes. The household had been greatly disturbed by the mysterious voice, and I thought perhaps I could adjust the acoustic apparatus to prevent further occurrences. Sir Edmund had taught me the basic principles of the resonance chambers, and I hoped to spare Lady Ashworth additional distress." "A commendable motive," Holmes observed, producing his magnifying glass to examine the lock mechanism once more. "Yet this morning's inspection reveals traces of a specialized lubricant that suggests more than casual familiarity with precision instruments. The oil used here is of a type employed by chronometer makers, a substance requiring both technical knowledge and professional access to obtain." This observation caused Hartwell visible discomfort, though he responded with admirable steadiness. "My uncle's firm does indeed employ such materials, Mr. Holmes. I occasionally assist with delicate mechanisms during my visits to London. Sir Edmund was aware of my technical background. It was partly why he engaged my services as his assistant." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, then moved to the acoustic apparatus itself. With careful precision, he adjusted the curved reflectors and positioned one of Sir Edmund's recording devices at the chamber's focal point. "Demonstrate, if you would, the adjustments you made last evening. Show us precisely what you hoped to accomplish." What followed proved most illuminating. Hartwell's manipulation of the equipment displayed not merely casual familiarity, but genuine expertise in acoustic engineering. His adjustments to the reflector angles and resonator positioning were executed with the confidence of one thoroughly versed in the principles involved. Yet, as he worked, I observed Holmes noting details that escaped my understanding. The particular way Hartwell handled certain components, his instinctive knowledge of which adjustments would produce specific effects. "Remarkable proficiency for an amateur," Holmes murmured, though whether in admiration or suspicion remained unclear. "Tell me, during your final conversation with Sir Edmund on Monday evening, did he mention any concerns about his recent correspondence with Professor Zimmermann?" "Indeed he did, sir. Sir Edmund was quite agitated about the professor's criticisms of his work. He felt that Zimmermann had deliberately misrepresented his theoretical conclusions in order to advance competing research." Hartwell paused, his expression growing troubled. "But, Mr. Holmes, I must correct something I said yesterday. Professor Zimmermann did not depart the manor on Monday evening, as I previously indicated." This revelation struck like a thunderbolt. Lady Ashworth gasped audibly, while Holmes's grey eyes sharpened with intense interest. "Explain yourself, Mr. Hartwell. You stated clearly that the professor had left before your own departure." "I was mistaken, sir, or rather, I spoke carelessly. When I left the house around 9 o'clock to take the evening air, I observed the professor's travelling case still in the front hall. Moreover, as I walked the grounds, I noticed a light burning in the study window well past 10 o'clock, suggesting the two men were still engaged in discussion. Hartwell's voice carried genuine distress. "I fear I may have inadvertently misled you regarding the timeline of events." Holmes received this information with that peculiar stillness that marked his most significant deductions. "You observed Professor Zimmermann's presence in the house after the estimated time of Sir Edmund's death. This places an entirely different complexion upon our investigation." He moved to the study window, examining the latch mechanism with renewed interest. "Watson, observe these scratches around the window frame. They suggest forced entry from the exterior, yet the damage is minimal, the work of someone skilled in such techniques." The implications were staggering. If Zimmermann had indeed been present in the study during Sir Edmund's final hours, then either the German professor was directly involved in the death, or the timeline we had constructed was fundamentally flawed. Holmes's examination of the window revealed additional evidence that complicated our understanding further. Traces of the same specialized chronometer oil found on the door lock, suggesting that whoever had forced the window possessed the same technical materials and expertise we had attributed to Hartwell. "The physical evidence points in multiple directions," Holmes observed, with evident satisfaction. "We have chronometer oil that suggests professional instrument makers, forced entry that indicates criminal intent, and acoustic apparatus that could create elaborate deceptions. Yet we also have contradictory testimony regarding Professor Zimmermann's presence and timing that transforms our entire theoretical framework." At this moment, Thomas appeared in the doorway with evident urgency. "Begging your pardon, sir, but there's been a development. A telegram has arrived from London, and the gentleman who delivered it is waiting for a reply." He handed Holmes a yellow envelope with trembling fingers. Holmes opened the telegram with characteristic precision, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read. "Most illuminating, Watson. This communication is from Inspector Lestrade, reporting that Professor Heinrich Zimmermann was found dead in his London lodgings yesterday morning, apparently from natural causes, but occurring 2 days after Sir Edmund's death." He looked up at our assembled company with that penetrating gaze that seemed to pierce through to the very heart of deception. "Gentlemen, we are no longer investigating a single mysterious death, but what appears to be a carefully orchestrated sequence of eliminations." The revelation struck the room like a physical blow. Lady Ashworth swayed visibly, while Hartwell's face drained of all colour. If Zimmermann was dead, then either someone else had impersonated him at Ashworth Manor, or our entire reconstruction of Monday evening's events was fundamentally incorrect. "The dying echo grows more complex," Holmes murmured, his eyes gleaming with that particular intensity that marked his engagement with the most challenging puzzles. "We have voices that speak after death, visitors who may not have existed, and now a second death that transforms our German professor from suspect to victim. Watson, I believe we are dealing with a mind of extraordinary cunning, one that has used the very principles of acoustic deception to create not merely auditory illusions, but a complete false narrative designed to conceal the true nature of these crimes. As the morning progressed toward its climax, I found myself wondering how many other assumptions about this case would prove to be as carefully constructed as the acoustic illusions that had first brought us to Ashworth Manor, in the chamber where sound itself had been transformed into an instrument of deception. The truth awaited our discovery like a resonant frequency that would, when finally struck, reveal the hidden harmonies underlying this symphony of murder. The stakes had risen dramatically, and Holmes's behaviour reflected the increased complexity of our challenge. We were no longer pursuing a single killer using acoustic trickery, but confronting what appeared to be a master manipulator who had orchestrated multiple deaths while creating an elaborate false trail designed to confound even the most careful investigation. The dying echo had become a chorus of the dead, and somewhere among the resonant chambers of Ashworth Manor, their killer waited to be exposed. The shock of Lestrade's telegram had scarcely settled upon our small assembly when Holmes announced his immediate course of action with characteristic decisiveness. "Watson, we depart for London within the hour. If Professor Zimmermann died 2 days ago, then either we have been pursuing a phantom, or someone of considerable cunning has orchestrated an elaborate impersonation." He turned to Lady Ashworth with that peculiar intensity which marked his most serious investigations. "I must request that no member of your household leave the estate until our return. The person responsible for these deceptions remains among us, and flight would confirm guilt as surely as any confession." The morning train to Victoria carried us through countryside shrouded in November mist. Holmes wrapped in contemplative silence while his long fingers drummed restlessly upon his knee. Only once did he speak, producing from his waistcoat pocket a tiny brass screw he had removed from the hidden acoustic device. "Observe the threading, Watson. English Whitworth standard, not the metric system favoured by German manufacturers. Our foreign instrument was born within a mile of Regent Street and nurtured on specialised oils available only to London's finest chronometer makers. Our first destination proved to be Hartwell and Associates in Regent Street, a narrow establishment whose windows displayed the precise craftsmanship that marks England's premier scientific instrument makers. Mr. Josiah Hartwell, a spare gentleman whose scarred fingers spoke of decades working with delicate mechanisms, received us with professional courtesy that barely concealed his evident unease when Holmes inquired about recent deliveries to Sir Edmund Ashworth. "Certainly, Mr. Holmes," he replied, consulting a leather-bound ledger with obvious reluctance. "A precision acoustic chronometer with variable delay mechanism delivered the Saturday before Sir Edmund's unfortunate death. The commission came through my nephew Reginald, who occasionally recommends our services to his scientific associates." At Holmes's request, he produced a small vial of the specialized chronometer oil whose sweet odor we had detected at the manor. Our own formulation for the finest pivots and bearings, rather expensive, but essential for instruments requiring absolute precision. Holmes's examination of the workshop revealed additional evidence of considerable significance. Among the brass nameplates awaiting engraving, several bore foreign designations including Zimmermann and Associates, Heidelberg. Mr. Hartwell's explanation proved most illuminating. "We occasionally repair imported instruments, sir. Clients prefer their apparatus to bear the original manufacturer's identification, though the internal mechanisms may be entirely rebuilt with English components." "Most accommodating," Holmes observed with apparent casualness, though I detected the sharp interest in his grey eyes. "And this particular nameplate, was it requested for the Ashworth Commission?" The elder Hartwell's discomfort became unmistakable. "I cannot recall the specific details, Mr. Holmes. My nephew handled the arrangements, and I confess I paid little attention to such administrative matters." From Regent Street we proceeded directly to the Bloomsbury lodgings, where Professor Zimmermann had died, meeting Inspector Lestrade at the entrance with his characteristic briskness. "A curious business, Mr. Holmes," he announced, leading us up narrow stairs to a modest but scrupulously clean room. "The landlady confirms the professor returned from Dover on Tuesday evening in considerable distress, complaining of impossible scientific phenomena and muttering about elaborate fraud. He took to his bed immediately and was found dead Wednesday morning. Heart failure, according to the physician's certificate." Holmes's examination of the professor's effects revealed additional pieces of our increasingly complex puzzle. Among the papers scattered across a small writing desk lay an unopened letter bearing the Ashworth crest, while detailed notes in Zimmerman's precise handwriting described what he termed acoustic deceptions of extraordinary sophistication designed to discredit legitimate research. Most significantly, we discovered a cheap envelope bearing traces of tobacco and a faint, sweet odor that Holmes immediately identified as our familiar chronometer oil. The professor suspected the very deception we have uncovered, Holmes concluded after studying these documents. His death was not coincidental, but rather the elimination of someone who had discovered the truth behind Sir Edmund's acoustic experiments. We are dealing with a killer who understood that both men posed threats to a carefully constructed scheme. Our return journey to Surrey found Holmes in a state of intense mental activity, his earlier contemplative mood replaced by the focused energy that always preceded his most brilliant deductions. The evidence converges upon a single, inescapable conclusion, Watson. Someone with intimate knowledge of both Sir Edmund's work and his correspondence with Zimmerman orchestrated an elaborate sequence of deceptions designed to eliminate both men while creating a false trail that would satisfy cursory investigation. Evening had settled over Ashworth Manor when we arrived to find the household in a state of considerable agitation. Lady Ashworth met us at the entrance with evident relief, though her composure remained strained by the day's revelations. Young Hartwell appeared pale and subdued, his scholarly demeanour intact despite the obvious pressure of our investigation. Holmes immediately requested individual interviews with each member of the household staff, seeking to establish the precise sequence of events on Monday evening. What emerged from these careful interrogations painted a picture of calculated deception that extended far beyond our initial understanding. Thomas, the footman, provided a description of the mysterious visitor that differed significantly from Mary's earlier account. Where she had described a tall, thin man with spectacles, Thomas recalled someone of medium height with a pronounced limp and what appeared to be a false beard. "The accent troubled me, sir," Thomas added with evident concern. "Sometimes German-like, sometimes suggesting other foreign parts, and the gentleman seemed unfamiliar with the house's layout, though he claimed to be expected by Sir Edmund." Mrs. Caldwell corroborated these observations, adding that the visitor had spoken briefly with her at the kitchen entrance. "His manner was confident, sir, but something in his bearing suggested he was not accustomed to such grand houses. More like a tradesman, playing at being a gentleman, if you take my meaning." These revelations confirmed Holmes's theory of an elaborate impersonation, yet the question of the impersonator's identity remained tantalizingly elusive. As we concluded our interviews, Holmes turned his attention once more to young Hartwell, whose position in our investigation had grown increasingly precarious. "Mr. Hartwell," Holmes began with characteristic directness, "your expertise with acoustic equipment, your connection to the firm that manufactured the deception device, and your midnight visit to the study place you at the center of this mystery. Moreover, your earlier error regarding Professor Zimmerman's departure now appears less a mistake than a carefully orchestrated piece of misleading testimony." Hartwell's response carried genuine distress. "Mr. Holmes, I swear upon my honor that I have told you the truth as I understand it. Sir Edmund was my mentor and benefactor. The thought that I might be suspected of his murder fills me with horror. Yet the facts, when assembled methodically, present a rather different picture," Holmes continued relentlessly. "The forced entry at the study window, achieved with a thin blade yet leaving traces of the same chronometer oil found on the door lock, suggests someone with your precise skills and access to specialized materials." As the evening progressed toward its climax, Holmes announced his intention to stage what he termed the final demonstration. In the circular study, he made several subtle alterations to the acoustic apparatus, adjusting reflector angles and replacing the existing recording cylinder with a blank one. Most significantly, he applied a clear solution from his pocket case to the device's winding mechanism. "A little silver nitrate, Watson," he explained with evident satisfaction. "The next hand that tends to this mechanism will carry my chemical signature upon their fingers when exposed to proper reagents. Our killer believes himself beyond detection, but the very instruments of his deception will ultimately provide the means of his exposure." Holmes then requested that Lady Ashworth make a simple announcement to the household that certain valuables of sentimental worth would be secured in Sir Edmund's study overnight, and that no one was to approach that wing under any circumstances. The trap was set with mathematical precision, designed to force our adversary into a decisive move that would finally reveal their identity. As the manor settled into the peculiar hush of a country house at night, Holmes and I took our positions for what promised to be the climactic confrontation. The acoustic chamber that had concealed so many deceptions now awaited its final performance, while somewhere in the gathering darkness, the architect of this elaborate symphony of murder prepared for an audience that would prove far more challenging than any they had previously encountered. "The dying echo has told us its secrets, Watson," Holmes murmured, as we prepared for the evening's revelation. "Tonight, we shall discover whether its master possesses the courage to face the consequences of their elaborate composition, or whether they will attempt one final, desperate movement in this deadly concerto." The instruments of murder lay ready for their ultimate performance, and in the resonant chambers of Ashworth Manor, the truth awaited its moment to ring out with perfect, inescapable clarity. The hours of our vigil stretched with agonizing deliberation, each minute marked by the distant chiming of the manor's clocks and the subtle creaks that spoke of an ancient house settling into the deepest watches of the night. Holmes had positioned himself at the window overlooking the study wing's approach, his field glass trained upon the moonlit grounds, while I maintained observation of the corridor from behind the heavy tapestry that concealed our presence. The acoustic properties that Sir Edmund had so carefully engineered now served our purpose, carrying the faintest disturbances along the textured walls with supernatural clarity. Near 1:30, the profound silence was broken by the almost imperceptible whisper of footsteps upon polished wood. A slender shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the corridor's far end, moving with the practiced stealth of one intimately familiar with every board and beam of the house. It was Reginald Hartwell, his scholarly frame barely visible in the dim gaslight, yet his movements carried none of the uncertainty one might expect from a casual intruder. Instead, he approached the study door with the quiet purpose of someone attending to a familiar and necessary task. Holmes raised his hand in a gesture for absolute silence, his grey eyes gleaming with that particular satisfaction which marked the successful culmination of his most carefully laid plans. We watched as Hartwell paused at the study door, his head cocked in a listening attitude, before producing from his waistcoat pocket not a key, but a set of delicate instruments that caught the faint light with metallic precision. The soft click of tumblers yielded to his expert manipulation, and within moments the heavy oak door swung inward to admit him to Sir Edmund's chamber. "Observe, Watson," Holmes breathed, his voice barely audible, the practiced ease with which he bypasses that lock. Such skill speaks not of criminal desperation, but of professional training in the manipulation of precision mechanisms. The young man remained within the study for perhaps 10 minutes, during which time no sound emerged from the chamber's acoustically sealed interior. When he finally reappeared, carefully securing the door behind him, his movements carried a subtle urgency that suggested his task had been completed with less satisfaction than anticipated. It was at this moment that Holmes chose to step forward, his tall figure emerging from concealment with the fluid grace of a natural predator. "Good evening, Mr. Hartwell," he said in conversational tones that carried clearly along the corridor's engineered acoustics. Or perhaps I should say, "Good morning," given the lateness of the hour. "You appear to be making these nocturnal visits a regular habit." The effect upon Hartwell was immediate and devastating. His face drained of all colour as he spun to confront us, the lock-picking instruments clattering to the polished floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. His eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension, darted between Holmes's implacable figure and the study door that had betrayed his secret activities. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson!" His voice emerged as a strained whisper, barely above the level of breath. "What brings you to this wing at such an hour?" "We are conducting what you might term a practical experiment in criminal detection," Holmes replied with that deceptive mildness which invariably preceded his most devastating revelations. "The silver nitrate solution I applied to certain components of the acoustic apparatus will, when exposed to proper reagents, provide irrefutable evidence of recent contact. Your fingers, Mr. Hartwell, now bear the chemical signature of your guilt." Hartwell stared at his hands with the horrified fascination of one witnessing his own doom, then back at Holmes with a flicker of desperate defiance, warring against the crushing weight of exposure. For a moment, I thought he might attempt flight, but Holmes's commanding presence and the futility of escape in such confined quarters seemed to drain the fight from his scholarly frame. "You cannot prove anything conclusive," he stammered, though his voice carried little conviction. "I merely came to ensure the apparatus remained secure." "Lady Ashworth mentioned valuables." "A commendable concern for your employer's property," Holmes observed with sardonic appreciation, "yet hardly sufficient to explain breaking into a locked room in the dead of night, particularly when that room contains the very device used to simulate your late mentor's voice from beyond the grave." He produced from his pocket the small brass screw he had earlier removed from the acoustic mechanism. "This component, Mr. Hartwell, bears the threading and metallurgy characteristic of English manufacture, yet it was discovered within an apparatus whose external casing proclaimed German origins. Your uncle's firm specializes in such reconstructions, does it not?" The weight of Holmes's relentless logic seemed to crush what remained of Hartwell's composure. His shoulders sagged as the full implications of his exposure became clear, and I observed the transformation of a man who had believed himself beyond detection into one who recognized the inevitability of his fate. "The chronometer oil found throughout this wing," Holmes continued with inexorable precision, "the specialized knowledge required to construct such elaborate acoustic deceptions, the intimate familiarity with Sir Edmund's experimental schedule and habits, all point to someone with your unique combination of access, expertise, and opportunity." He paused, studying Hartwell's defeated expression with clinical interest. "But most damning of all is your impersonation of Professor Zimmermann on the evening of Sir Edmund's death." This final accusation struck Hartwell like a physical blow. How could you possibly— The false beard, observed by the servants, the affected limp, the deliberately theatrical German accent, all the hallmarks of an elaborate performance designed to create a convenient scapegoat for murder. "You even took care to plant that Turkish cigar, knowing it would further implicate our unfortunate professor." Holmes's voice grew colder as he continued, "Zimmermann's subsequent death in London was no coincidence, but a calculated elimination of the one man who had recognized your acoustic deceptions for what they truly were." The confession, when it finally came, emerged with the broken cadence of a man whose carefully constructed world had collapsed around him. "He threatened to expose everything," Hartwell whispered, his voice hollow with defeat. "Sir Edmund's discoveries could have secured our futures, but he insisted on pure research, while practical applications went unexplored. The investors I had contacted were prepared to pay handsomely for exclusive access to the acoustic principles, but Edmund refused to consider commercial development." "And so you eliminated the obstacle to your ambitions," Holmes observed, with clinical detachment. "The acoustic apparatus became both the means of murder and the instrument of misdirection, creating supernatural phenomena to conceal very earthly crimes." As we prepared to escort our prisoner back to the main house, Holmes paused to examine the lock-picking tools that lay scattered upon the corridor floor. "Precision instruments, Watson, crafted by the same skilled hands that produced the acoustic deception device. Young Hartwell's technical education has served him well, though perhaps not in the manner his uncle intended. The implications of this observation would prove crucial to our final understanding of the case, for in the growing light of dawn we would discover that the web of deception surrounding Sir Edmund's death extended far beyond the ambitions of a single, misguided assistant. The dying echo had revealed one voice of guilt, but the symphony of murder contained additional movements that awaited their moment of revelation. "The game approaches its conclusion, Watson," Holmes murmured, as we made our way through the silent corridors of Ashworth Manor. "Yet I suspect the final movement will prove the most complex of all, for the instruments of this deadly composition were crafted by hands more experienced than those of our scholarly friend here. The dawn that broke over Surrey would bring with it revelations that would transform our understanding of the case once more, as the true architect of Sir Edmund's destruction prepared to take the stage for the ultimate performance in this deadly concerto of deception and murder. The pale light of dawn found us securing young Hartwell in a small sitting room adjacent to the main corridor, with Thomas posted as guard and strict instructions that no refreshments should pass without my personal inspection. Holmes, who had not slept at all during our vigil, immediately set about applying his chemical reagent to the prisoner's fingertips in my presence. Within moments, faint, dusky stains emerged upon Hartwell's skin like guilty shadows, providing irrefutable testimony that he had indeed serviced the acoustic apparatus after Holmes's warning. Yet rather than displaying the satisfaction I had expected from such conclusive evidence, Holmes remained troubled, his grey eyes fixed upon our captive with that peculiar intensity which suggested deeper currents yet to be explored. "Mr. Hartwell," he began with characteristic precision, "you have confessed to creating the acoustic deception and impersonating Professor Zimmermann. Yet I find myself increasingly convinced that you are not the architect of this elaborate scheme." Hartwell raised his head with evident surprise, his voice emerging as barely more than a whisper. "I have told you the truth, Mr. Holmes. The responsibility for these terrible crimes rests upon my shoulders alone. Perhaps the immediate execution, but not the conception," Holmes replied, producing from his waistcoat pocket the small brass screw he had earlier extracted from the hidden device. "This component represents craftsmanship far beyond your current capabilities, requiring decades of experience in precision instrument manufacture. Moreover, your confession lacks the calculated coldness I would expect from someone capable of orchestrating Professor Zimmermann's elimination in London." Moving to the window, Holmes continued his analysis with relentless logic. "The true mastermind possessed intimate knowledge of your uncle's business, access to specialized materials and nameplates, and the technical expertise to construct devices that could deceive even trained scientists. Most significantly, this person had the commercial vision to recognize the immense value of Sir Edmund's discoveries and the ruthless determination to eliminate anyone who stood in the way of their exploitation. The implications of Holmes's words struck me with chilling clarity. You suspect Josiah Hartwell orchestrated the entire scheme. I am certain of it, Watson. Recall his discomfort during our visit to Regent Street, his evasive responses regarding the German nameplates, and most tellingly, his intimate knowledge of chronometer oils and precision mechanisms. Holmes turned back to face our prisoner. Your uncle manipulated your loyalty and perhaps your affections for Lady Ashworth to serve his commercial ambitions. He provided the technical means while using you as the instrument of implementation. Hartwell's reaction confirmed Holmes's deductions. His face crumpled with the devastating recognition of how thoroughly he had been used. He said Sir Edmund was standing in the way of progress, that his discoveries could benefit humanity if properly developed. I believed I was serving science itself. And when Professor Zimmermann threatened to expose the deception, Uncle Josiah insisted the old man had to be silenced. He provided the poison and detailed instructions for its administration. I thought I was protecting our work, but I see now that I was merely protecting his profits. Holmes nodded grimly, then announced his immediate course of action. We shall provide your uncle with an opportunity to complete his scheme, Watson. A carefully worded message suggesting that certain incriminating evidence remains hidden in Sir Edmund's study should draw him here tonight. The remainder of the day was spent in meticulous preparation. Holmes composed a letter in Hartwell's trembling script, ostensibly warning his uncle that the cylinder containing our recordings must be retrieved before Holmes discovers its significance. This message was dispatched to London with instructions for immediate delivery, while Holmes made subtle alterations to the study's acoustic apparatus that would serve his purposes when darkness fell. As evening approached, Holmes positioned our forces with military precision. I took station at the side entrance to the study wing, revolver in hand, while Thomas guarded the main corridor. Holmes himself concealed himself within the circular chamber's acoustic alcove, where the curved walls would swallow his outline in shadow. The November darkness had fully settled when the soft crunch of cautious footsteps upon gravel announced our quarry's arrival. Through the window I observed a figure moving with the measured economy of one intimately familiar with the manor's layout. He mounted the study steps without hesitation and paused only long enough to fit a key into the lock with the certainty born of long practice. When the door swung inward, Holmes struck a match, the brief flare illuminating the intruder's face with startling clarity. "Good evening, Mr. Josiah Hartwell," he said with quiet satisfaction. The elder Hartwell did not start or cry out. Instead, he froze with the absolute stillness of a craftsman who measures angles and tolerances even in moments of extreme danger. His eyes, cool and calculating, took in the arrangement of room and watchers with professional assessment. "You have me at a disadvantage, sir," he replied, and I noted how his voice carried the faint accent Mary had described from that first evening's mysterious visitor. "On the contrary," Holmes returned, "you have held considerable advantage for some days, an advantage composed of duplicate keys, relabeled instruments, and a nephew you judged sufficiently malleable for your purposes. That advantage ends now." The instrument maker's right hand moved in what might have been merely the habitual adjustment of a cuff, but Holmes's arm shot out with viper-like precision to catch his wrist. A small glass vial fell to the wooden floor and shattered, releasing the unmistakable bitter almond scent that spoke of prussic acid and swift, silent death. "For eliminating inconvenient witnesses," Holmes observed with clinical detachment. "A craftsman's solution, clean, decisive, and undetectable when properly administered. At this moment, Inspector Lestrade appeared in the doorway with his characteristic briskness, having arrived on the evening train as Holmes had arranged. "You'll come quietly, Mr. Hartwell," he announced with professional cheer. "We've transport waiting." The elder Hartwell's gaze moved once to where his nephew waited behind the screen, then returned to Holmes with something approaching grudging respect. "You believe you can prove murder?" "I rarely believe, Mr. Hartwell. I demonstrate." Holmes gestured toward the accumulated evidence, the desks revealing stains, the acoustic apparatus with its English components bearing German labels, the specialized oils that linked every aspect of the deception to the Regent Street workshop. "Tomorrow we shall reconstruct the entire sequence before witnesses, allowing the room itself to testify to your methodical elimination of Sir Edmund Ashworth." As the constables secured our prisoner, Josiah Hartwell's mask of professional composure finally slipped, revealing beneath it the calculating avarice that had transformed scientific discovery into an instrument of murder. The old fool would have died in poverty, surrounded by theories while fortunes waited to be made. I offered partnership, development, a chance to see his work benefit the world through proper commercial application. And when he refused to transform discovery into profit, you decided to remove the obstacle, Holmes concluded. The acoustic apparatus provided both means and misdirection, while your nephew's devotion made him the perfect unwitting accomplice. The confession that followed revealed the full scope of Josiah Hartwell's ambitions. He had recognized the commercial potential of Sir Edmund's acoustic discoveries months earlier, cultivating his nephew's position to gain inside knowledge while preparing the technical means for their acquisition. The elaborate deception involving Professor Zimmermann had been designed to create a perfect scapegoat while eliminating the one scientist capable of exposing the acoustic fraud. "The dying echo has finally revealed its true voice," Holmes observed as justice prepared to claim its due. "Not the supernatural communication of the dead, but the calculated manipulations of a living man whose greed transformed the pursuit of knowledge into an instrument of destruction." As the prisoners were led away through the manor's moonlit corridors, I reflected upon the tragic waste this case represented. Sir Edmund's brilliant discoveries, which might have advanced human understanding immeasurably, had instead become tools of deception in the hands of those who valued profit above progress. The acoustic principles that could have unlocked new realms of scientific knowledge had been perverted into instruments of murder and betrayal. Yet justice had prevailed, and the dying echo that had haunted Ashworth Manor would speak no more of crimes concealed within its resonant chambers. The symphony of murder had reached its inevitable conclusion, conducted not by supernatural forces but by the all-too-human orchestrations of greed and ambition. The morning that followed our dramatic confrontation transformed Sir Edmund's circular study into a theatre of justice, its curved walls bearing witness to Holmes's methodical reconstruction of one of the most elaborate deceptions we had ever encountered. Lady Ashworth sat with quiet dignity, her composure maintained despite the terrible revelations that had shattered her understanding of her husband's death. Inspector Lestrade stood ready with his notebook, while young Reginald Hartwell remained under guard, his scholarly demeanor replaced by the hollow expression of one who had discovered the true nature of his manipulation. Holmes positioned himself at the center of the chamber, his tall figure commanding the acoustically perfect space as he began his demonstration. "The genius of this crime," he announced, adjusting the curved reflectors with practiced precision, "lay not in supernatural elements but in the systematic exploitation of Sir Edmund's own scientific achievements. Observe how elementary physics may serve the purposes of elaborate murder." With theatrical precision, Holmes recreated the mechanism that had produced the ghostly midnight voice. he positioned the hidden recording device at the chamber's focal point, its brass cylinder gleaming despite the false German nameplate that had been designed to mislead our investigation. The wax pellet timing mechanism, heated by a carefully positioned spirit lamp, demonstrated how predetermined activation could be achieved with mathematical accuracy. When the wax yielded to calculated temperature, Holmes explained as the demonstration unfolded, the spring-loaded trigger activated this phonographic apparatus, reproducing Sir Edmund's own voice with startling fidelity. The chamber's unique acoustic properties then shaped and amplified the sound, sending it along the corridor's textured walls like a trained animal following a predetermined path. Thomas and Mrs. Caldwell heard Sir Edmund's voice because they were indeed hearing Sir Edmund's voice, recorded during an earlier session and reproduced through mechanical means at precisely the moment Josiah Hartwell had calculated. The demonstration's effect upon our assembled witnesses was profound. The recorded words emerged from the chamber's curved walls with ethereal quality, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once as the acoustic principles transformed mechanical reproduction into supernatural phenomenon. Lady Ashworth pressed her handkerchief to her lips as the implications became clear, while even Lestrade nodded with evident appreciation for the technical sophistication involved. Holmes then provided the complete reconstruction of Sir Edmund's final evening, his analysis revealing the methodical nature of Josiah Hartwell's approach to murder. On Monday evening, the elder Hartwell entered this study not as an intruder, but as a trusted associate, using either a duplicate key obtained through his nephew or one fashioned with the precision instruments at his disposal. The chronometer oil we discovered throughout this wing, that distinctive sweet odor, foreign to any household yet common as air to Regent Street workshops, marked every aspect of his presence. The murder itself had been accomplished with the cold efficiency of a craftsman, eliminating a defective component. Sir Edmund was administered prussic acid, most likely dissolved in his evening tea and masked by the bitter herbs he habitually consumed for digestive complaints. The poison acted swiftly, causing the apparent seizure that Dr. Pemberton would later attribute to natural causes. The overturned inkwell, whose stain flowed away from where Sir Edmund was ultimately positioned, proves he was moved or arranged after the poison had taken effect. Holmes moved to the study window, indicating the evidence of forced entry that had initially suggested external threats. These scratches around the latch and the ladder impressions in the flower bed below were created after Sir Edmund's death to support the narrative of foreign intrigue. Every aspect of the crime scene was carefully orchestrated to direct suspicion toward Professor Zimmermann while concealing the domestic origins of the conspiracy. The revelation of Professor Zimmermann's fate provided the most chilling evidence of Josiah Hartwell's ruthless determination. The professor had travelled to London specifically to investigate what he suspected were fraudulent claims about acoustic research, Holmes explained, producing Zimmermann's notes from his leather portfolio. His examination of Sir Edmund's published papers had revealed theoretical inconsistencies that suggested deliberate deception. When Zimmermann arrived at the manor on Monday evening and discovered the truth, he became a threat that Josiah could not tolerate. Lestrade contributed the corroborating evidence that would ensure successful prosecution. The professor's landlady confirms a gentleman caller Tuesday evening, he announced with professional satisfaction. A tradesman type with a stiff leg and foreign neckcloth, Josiah Hartwell's impersonation of his own fictional character. The prussic acid was purchased from a Bloomsbury chemist on a forged laboratory order, signed with Josiah's own name in a moment of arrogant carelessness. The emotional climax came as Holmes addressed young Reginald directly, his voice carrying both stern judgment and unexpected compassion. Your uncle manipulated your devotion to Sir Edmund's work, providing you with technical means while encouraging your belief that you were protecting legitimate research. Your midnight visits to maintain the acoustic apparatus while incriminating were merely the continuation of your unwitting role in his elaborate deception. Reginald's response revealed the full tragedy of his position. "He used my loyalty," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the chamber's perfect acoustics. "He convinced me that Sir Edmund was standing in the way of progress, that his discoveries could benefit humanity if properly developed. I believed I was serving science itself, but I see now that I was merely protecting his profits." Josiah Hartwell's own confession, when it finally came, revealed the calculating avarice that had transformed scientific discovery into an instrument of murder. The old fool would have died in poverty, surrounded by theories, while fortunes waited to be made, he declared with defiant pride. "I offered partnership, development, a chance to see his work benefit the world through proper commercial application. His refusal to compromise pure research for practical advancement made him an obstacle to human progress." Holmes's response carried the cold finality of absolute judgment. "You're the world's prophet is a poor anodyne to private murder, Mr. Hartwell. You mistook possession of means for title to ends. Your nephew mistook ambition for duty. Sir Edmund mistook a workshop's diligence for a friend's devotion. Each paid for his error, but only one paid with his life." As the formal proceedings concluded and Lestrade prepared to escort the prisoners to London, Lady Ashworth approached Holmes with quiet gratitude. "You have given me truth, Mr. Holmes. It is a hard gift, but one I shall treasure. I intend to ensure that Edmund's papers pass to researchers who will honour both his discoveries and his principles." Holmes inclined his head with rare gentleness. "Guard his principles as jealously as his notes, Lady Ashworth. The acoustic phenomena your husband discovered remain valid despite their criminal application. His legacy will ultimately serve the advancement of human knowledge rather than the enrichment of criminal conspirators." The journey back to Baker Street found Holmes in a reflective mood, his sharp features softened by the satisfaction that always followed the successful resolution of a complex case. "The dying echo has taught us valuable lessons about the intersection of science and criminal behaviour, Watson," he observed as our train approached Victoria Station. "As human knowledge advances, so too must our understanding of how that knowledge might be misused by those who value profit above progress." As I settled into my familiar chair beside our fireplace that evening, I reflected upon the remarkable case we had just concluded. The acoustic principles that had made Sir Edmund's murder possible had also provided the means of solving it, as the very chamber designed to amplify sound had ultimately amplified the voice of justice itself. In the resonant spaces of Ashworth Manor, science had been both perverted and redeemed, reminding us that human knowledge, like the dying echoes we had investigated, carries forward the intentions of those who shape its course. "There is nothing more deceptive, Watson, than an obvious fact," Holmes murmured as he settled into his own chair, "unless it be a beautiful theory exploited by an ugly mind. We have witnessed the transformation of pure research into criminal conspiracy, but also the triumph of methodical investigation over elaborate deception." The case of the dying echo had reached its conclusion, but its lessons would resonate through our future investigations like the acoustic phenomena we had learned to understand. In a world where scientific advancement created new possibilities for both progress and peril, the methods of Sherlock Holmes would prove more essential than ever in distinguishing truth from the most sophisticated deceptions that human ingenuity could devise. The dying echo had finally yielded to honest silence, and in that silence lay the profound satisfaction of justice served and truth revealed through the patient application of reason to the most complex puzzles human nature could construct. The journey back to Baker Street found Holmes in that peculiar state of mental satisfaction that invariably followed the successful resolution of a particularly intricate case. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels seemed to echo the methodical unfolding of our investigation, each measured beat a testament to the careful placement of clues and the inevitable triumph of logical analysis over elaborate deception. As the Surrey countryside gave way to London's familiar sprawl, I found myself reflecting upon the extraordinary web of scientific brilliance and human corruption we had so recently unravelled. "The case of the dying echo," Holmes observed, breaking the contemplative silence that had settled between us, "will serve as a particularly illuminating example of how the noblest human endeavours may be perverted by the basest motives. Sir Edmund's acoustic discoveries, which should have advanced our understanding of natural phenomena, became instead the instruments of his own destruction." He produced from his waistcoat pocket the small brass screw that had provided our first concrete evidence of the deception's domestic origins. This tiny component, Watson, spoke more eloquently than any witness. Its English threading and metallurgy contradicted the carefully fabricated German nameplate, pointing unerringly toward the Regent Street workshop, where murder was disguised as foreign intrigue. The implications of the case continued to resonate through Holmes's analysis as our train approached the capital. Josiah Hartwell possessed that most dangerous combination of technical brilliance and moral corruption, he continued, his grey eyes reflecting the gathering dusk. He recognized the commercial potential of Sir Edmund's pure research and, when legitimate partnership was refused, chose elimination over ethical compromise. Young Reginald was merely his instrument, manipulated through devotion to scientific progress and loyalty to family connections. "And Professor Zimmermann?" I inquired, the image of that earnest German scientist still vivid in my memory. Zimmermann represented the greatest threat to Josiah's scheme, a mind capable of recognizing scientific fraud and possessing the moral courage to expose it, Holmes replied grimly. His murder in London was not opportunistic, but calculated, the systematic elimination of a witness whose expertise made him uniquely dangerous to the conspiracy. Back in our familiar Baker Street lodgings, with the fire crackling cheerfully in the grate, and Mrs. Hudson's tea service restored to its customary excellence, Holmes settled into his armchair with evident satisfaction. The evening brought news that would provide complete closure to our investigation. A telegram from Inspector Lestrade confirmed that Josiah Hartwell had been formally charged with the murders of both Sir Edmund Ashworth and Professor Heinrich Zimmermann, while his nephew faced transportation for his unwitting complicity in the conspiracy. More significantly, a letter from Lady Ashworth revealed her determination to honour her husband's memory through practical action. She had established a research foundation dedicated to the ethical advancement of acoustic science, with Sir Edmund's papers and experimental apparatus donated to the Royal Institution, where they would serve legitimate scientific inquiry rather than criminal deception. The resonance chamber that had once concealed murder would be converted into a proper laboratory, its acoustic properties employed in the pursuit of knowledge rather than the concealment of crime. "There is profound satisfaction in such resolution," Holmes observed, examining Lady Ashworth's elegant script by the firelight. "The very instruments of deception will serve the advancement of human understanding. Sir Edmund's legacy has been redeemed through the proper application of scientific method to the detection of crime." A subsequent communication from young Reginald Hartwell, written from his place of confinement, provided perhaps the most poignant element of our case's conclusion. Despite his circumstances, his letter demonstrated continued devotion to scientific precision, including detailed technical analyses of the acoustic apparatus his uncle had perverted for murderous purposes. His genuine remorse for his role in the conspiracy, combined with his scholarly dedication to understanding the very mechanisms of his deception spoke well of his fundamental character. The lad possessed genuine scientific talent, Holmes reflected, studying Hartwell's careful diagrams and mathematical calculations. His uncle's manipulation exploited not weakness but virtue, devotion to his mentor, and dedication to the advancement of human knowledge. Under different circumstances, he might have proven a worthy successor to Sir Edmund's research. As the evening progressed toward that comfortable hour when London settles into its ancient rhythms, Holmes turned his attention to the broader implications of our investigation. The criminal mind evolves, Watson, adapting new knowledge to ancient purposes of greed and violence. As human understanding advances through scientific discovery, so too must our methods of distinguishing legitimate research from elaborate criminal deception. The Ashworth case has provided valuable lessons in the intersection of science and criminal behavior that will serve us well in future investigations. The resolution had demonstrated once again the power of methodical investigation applied to even the most sophisticated deceptions. The chemical reagents that had exposed Hartwell's guilt, the acoustic principles that had revealed the mechanism of supernatural fraud, and the systematic analysis of chronometer oils and specialized tools had all contributed to a prosecution based upon demonstrable physical evidence rather than circumstantial speculation. There is nothing more satisfying than cases that yield completely to logical analysis, Holmes mused, his keen features softened by the dancing firelight. The dying echo taught us that even the most elaborate criminal schemes must ultimately conform to natural law. No murderer, however ingenious his methods, can escape the consequences of physical evidence properly interpreted through scientific reasoning. As I prepared our final notes for the official records, I found myself contemplating the human tragedy that had underlain the technical brilliance of the case. Sir Edmund Ashworth had died not because his research was flawed, but because his scientific integrity proved incompatible with commercial exploitation. Professor Zimmermann had perished because his scholarly skepticism threatened to expose profitable fraud. Young Reginald Hartwell had been manipulated through his very virtues, while his uncle had transformed legitimate craftsmanship into instruments of murder and deception. The fire settled into glowing embers as the London fog resumed its eternal dance against our windows, and in the comfortable quiet of our Baker Street refuge, Holmes reached for his pipe with the satisfied air of one who had successfully concluded a complex investigation. "The dying echo has finally yielded to honest silence, Watson," he murmured, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction which marked the resolution of our most challenging cases. In that silence lies the profound reward of justice served and truth revealed through the patient application of reason to the most sophisticated deceptions human ingenuity can devise. The voice that had seemed to speak from beyond the grave had been silenced forever, its mechanical origins exposed and its criminal purpose thwarted. Yet the lessons it had taught about the intersection of scientific advancement and criminal behavior would resonate through our future investigations like the acoustic phenomena we had learned to understand and ultimately to master. The case of the dying echo had taken its place among our chronicles of justice, triumphant over elaborate conspiracy, a testament to the enduring power of methodical investigation in an age where human knowledge created ever more sophisticated possibilities for both progress and peril. As Holmes settled deeper into his chair, already scanning the evening papers for hints of our next challenge, I reflected that the world remained full of mysteries awaiting the touch of his unparalleled intellect. In the resonant chambers of crime and deception that surrounded us in this great metropolis, the methods of Sherlock Holmes would continue to bring hidden harmonies of truth to light, no matter how elaborate the compositions of those who sought to conceal their guilt through the perversion of human knowledge and scientific discovery.